Hello and welcome to World Regional Geography. My name is Sam, and this week I'm going to introduce you to the course by talking about the basics of what is geography. This is a little bit deceptively simple, but I think you'll see in the next few minutes some of the key concepts that we'll be engaging with this semester, what exactly it means to think of them as part of the study of geography, and how you'll get to use them throughout the course. So to start by stating the obvious, here's a quote from famous geographer Isaiah Bowman about what geography is. And referring to the dictionary, we find something quite similar, although a little bit more detailed. Basically, the science of earth and life. This has also been defined by other older philosophers as focusing on the ecumene, so you might be familiar with the word ecumenical, which basically refers to all inhabitable places on the earth. Sort of the facetious but not completely off-base definition is that if you get too far below the range of what geography is focused on, if you go too far below the surface of the earth, then you are working on geology. And if you get too far above, then you're working on astronomy. Everything in between, everything inhabitable, is the realm of geography. This is, of course, just one definition of geography. Actually, it's a very, very large discipline with a very long history, spanning hundreds, if not thousands of years. And there are many, many different theoretical and methodological approaches taken by geographers, but all within probably this realm of the inhabitable earth. Three essential characteristics of geographic study include looking, first of all, at spatial variation of phenomena over the Earth's surface. So this is a complicated way of saying things are not evenly distributed. The surface of the Earth varies from one place to another. Secondly, a key aspect of geographical inquiry is looking at how humans interact with the environment in different ways. And again, how interaction is different from place to place, how it is spatially uneven, or how it exhibits spatial variation. And then finally, we use these intellectual constructs of regions and particular places as an analytical tool to help us understand patterns in the world. So, of course, if you were up in space looking down, you wouldn't see the 50 states in different colors. You wouldn't see a line on the planet between Mexico and the United States. You might be able to see where forests are and mountains are, but we divide the world into different sorts of analytical subunits. And in this course, we use world regions as the subunits. And you'll see that each week we go from world region to world region. So although there's no perfect set of subunits to study the geography of the entire planet, you'll see each week that each world region is a somewhat cohesive unit, although of course that's very much open to debate. Some of the concepts that you'll be hearing about over the course of the semester, and increasingly you'll be asked to apply these concepts in writing essays and carrying out projects, are the ideas of place and space, scale, connections, and time, proximity and distance, and people and the environment. And when it comes to thinking about the different world regions, and here we have a map of how they are divided by the textbook, and we roughly follow this throughout the course, we'll think about the systems that exist both within the regions and that connect the regions to one another, interdependence, again, first of all, of countries within regions and then between regions, and also change. And you'll see that these concepts interact with these other concepts, right? So, for instance, what sort of change is visible or not visible depending what scale you're looking at. For instance, there might be lots of migration within a country that doesn't show up if we're looking at the level of a world region. On the other hand, there could be transcontinental migration, such as is going on right now from North Africa and the Middle East to Europe. So depending on the scale that you're using and also the time frame, you'll see different sorts of phenomena. Here is a colorful wheel showing sort of what geographers do, and we'll go into more detail in the next 2 units as we look more closely at physical geography and human geography. But basically, physical geography is looking at things like geomorphology, climatology, biogeography, soils, basically looking at the environment itself, often with the thought of what does this mean for humans? Human geographers are looking at politics, behavior, and a lot of these methods and intellectual questions being pursued by human geographers might seem very familiar to you if you have taken a sociology course, an anthropology course, or a history course. Geography has shares a very similar lineage with those disciplines. And so don't be surprised if you find yourself thinking, oh, I thought that was anthropology. In fact, it's also geography. And then there are these specifically geographic methods, techniques, that are used also by other disciplines, but this is sort of geography's unique stamp. And you can see that in general, the common denominator here is that there are different ways of engaging with and conceptualizing spatial relationships. So cartography is the depiction of the distribution of phenomena in space and relationships between places and people and things, whereas spatial statistics might help us understand the spatial patterns mathematically. So, one is about depiction, one is about theorizing mathematically the kind of relationships, but the common denominator of these techniques that makes them, we argue, geographic is that they're spatial. And with this wide range of theoretical questions and methodologies, there's a lot of different geographical work. There's a lot of different kinds of geographical work that people in our department here at Ohio State are engaged in. So here, my friend Jeff Lafreniere, he's part of the Brian Mark Research Group in the Bird Polar Research Center. They're down in the Andes measuring groundwater, measuring glaciers, and taking ice cores from glaciers. On the other hand, you might have a human geographer, such as my friend Zoe Pearson or Chris Hartman down in Nicaragua, looking at old colonial archives, trying to find patterns that have affected the distribution of resources in the present. Or you might have something much closer to home, such as our Southeast Ohio project, led by Darla Monroe, Kendra McSweeney, and Becky Mansfield, looking at the environmental impacts of mining right here in Ohio. As I mentioned, maps are a key tool of geography, but there are a lot of different kinds of maps. Everything from conceptual maps to topographical maps. Cartography is an old science that is basically engaged with the ongoing problem of how to collect and how to best display data that will be useful. So some of the earliest maps that you might be familiar with existed primarily to aid in navigation, such as the Mercator projection. The benefit there being that with straight longitudinal lines, it made it easier for sailors to figure out where on the surface of the Earth they were using the technology of the time. However, it also vastly distorts the size of continents. As you get closer to the poles, it magnifies them, and as you get closer to the equator, it shrinks them, so that Greenland looks like it's about the size of Africa, even though it's about 1/30th the size of Africa. So depending on the use of a map, is it for wayfinding? Is it for giving newcomers information about a place? Is it for fun? It can take on many, many, many different forms. And now, of course, we have maps that we engage with in real time, something that I'm sure you did when you first moved to Columbus and had to find your way around on your smartphone. And for that reason, maps become big sources of revenue. Space becomes really, really important when it comes to where are you going to order your pizza from? What is the closest donut shop? Sorry if I'm making you hungry, making myself a little bit hungry. And because maps can be made so many different ways, we have to remember that they are not some impartial, empirical view of the world. Maps are always lies. And I don't mean that in the sense that it's always nefarious and intentional, that map makers are out to fool you, but that maps as merely representations of the world must always leave something out. And when you choose what to include or what to leave out, how to present it, that's how they are socially constructed. And so there's a lot at stake with this. Some of it might be seemingly mundane. For instance, having you choose between one donut shop or another, but they're also much more serious. So for instance, when intelligence agencies or the military send anthropologists or human geographers, and there's a history of this, into certain regions of the world that they want to better understand with the future potential intention of dropping bombs there, it's a very different kind of map. And also the idea of boundaries, right? We're very used to property having a very clear-cut meaning, but of course, in many cultures, property can be collectively held, or is not necessarily owned in the same way we are familiar with. And so when you make a map as a record of who controls a certain part of land, who belongs there or who doesn't belong there, it can have really, really big consequences for different societies and different cultures. All right, in addition to maps, geographers, like all other academic disciplines, publish articles and research, both for an academic audience, for fellow researchers to push human knowledge ahead, so to speak, and also for broader audiences. So here's sort of for a broader audience, an article by my friends James Baginski and Christine Bierman. Christine, who is now a assistant professor of geography at the University of Washington. And then, of course, real-time information, probably what you engage with the most would be weather maps, but also things like FluView from the Centers for Disease Control, showing public health officials where they need to pay the most attention. And then environmental planning is another big aspect of geographers' work. And here's an example from very close to home. They've been removing low-head dams all up and down the Olentangy and Scioto. And if you ever walk or bike up and down those trails, you'll be able to see the changes in the ecosystem on the banks of the river. And finally, this in many cases, this sort of work can translate into activism, can translate into some kind of intervention in politics. So whether it's a politics of something like helping refugees or environmental politics, the geographic concepts that I mentioned earlier in this lecture can have very significant political implications. So if you're someone who is passionate about something in the world, it might be in the environment, it might be social inequality, then these sorts of concepts and the sorts of methodological tools that geographers have developed will be useful to you in the future. So that is a basic introduction to geography. You'll get more from reading the first chapter of the text, which is available on the Carmen website. Due to copyright restrictions, we can only post the very beginning of the book on Carmen, so you'll have to get a personal copy of the book. You can get the 5th edition. You don't need the online features, so I encourage you to get the least expensive copy you can get your hands on. Used copies are fine. And if you're really hard-pressed, you can also use the 4th edition if you would like. It won't mess you up on the module comprehension quizzes. Please, as always, feel free to post questions in the frequently asked questions section of the Carmen site. We check that during weekday afternoons, and we'll try to answer within a day or two. And if you have a specific question that only applies to you, if it's about grades or if it's something of a personal nature, please go ahead and email me or email the TA, and you can find our contact information in the syllabus. So thank you so much, and welcome to World Regional Geography.